the subtle forces that decide who wins without a fight. Victory in finance rarely looks like victory. There is no celebration, no confrontation, and no clear moment when the outcome becomes obvious. This matters now because modern markets are not decided by strength alone. They are shaped by forces that operate long before conflict appears. By the time competition becomes visible, the result is often already determined. Winners are not those who fought hardest, but those who positioned themselves quietly while others were still preparing to react. To understand how this works, we have to move away from the idea that markets reward aggression. Aggression attracts attention. Attention invites resistance. The most effective advantages today are invisible ones: structural, psychological, and temporal. They shape outcomes without ever triggering a response. London became a master of this quiet positioning. The city learned that influence works best when it removes the need for confrontation entirely. By shaping defaults, setting expectations, and guiding behavior subtly, it allowed outcomes to emerge without conflict. Decisions were made upstream, before anyone realized the contest had begun. The advantage was not secrecy. It was sequence. Those who shaped the conditions under which decisions were made held an advantage that no amount of subsequent effort could overcome, because the terms of the contest had already been set before others arrived to compete. At first, these forces looked incidental. Timing advantages, network effects, familiarity bias, access to liquidity at critical moments. But together, they formed a pattern. Those closest to these forces didn't need to fight. They simply moved first or waited longer, while others played a different game. This created an uneven landscape. Some participants felt like the market was fair, but difficult. Others felt like it was hostile and unpredictable. The difference was not effort, it was position. And once these subtle forces take hold, competition stops looking like competition at all. It looks like inevitability. These forces operate long before anyone feels threatened. They shape who has time, who has options, and who is forced to react. Access to liquidity determines patience. Familiarity with systems determines speed. Trust determines flexibility. None of these advantages announce themselves. They reveal their power only when pressure arrives. London learned to cultivate these advantages quietly. Institutions embedded themselves into networks where information moved early, not loudly. Relationships formed long before they were needed. Optionality was built into balance sheets, legal structures, and timing itself. When uncertainty appeared, some participants already had room to maneuver. Others did not. This is how outcomes are decided without confrontation. Those under pressure focus on survival. Those with margin focus on opportunity. The gap widens silently. By the time conflict becomes visible, the decisive moves have already happened elsewhere. The contest was over before most participants knew it had begun. Behavior reinforces this imbalance. Markets reward calm under stress. Calm attracts trust. Trust attracts liquidity. Liquidity creates more calm. This feedback loop favors those who can remain still when others cannot. No aggression is required. The system does the work. From the outside, this looks unfair. From the inside, it feels logical. Participants respond rationally to incentives they cannot see fully. They adapt to environments that reward certain behaviors and punish others. The forces feel neutral, even as they shape outcomes relentlessly. This neutrality is the illusion, because while no one is being attacked, someone is always being displaced, not through force, but through structure. Not through conflict, but through positioning. The winners don't win battles. They avoid them entirely. And in markets shaped by subtle force, the absence of fight is often the clearest sign that the outcome was decided long ago. The conflict emerges when those invisible advantages begin to feel unreachable. Participants start noticing that effort alone no longer closes a gap. Skill matters, but only within limits. Speed helps, but only if access exists. Insight works, but only when timing allows it. The realization is unsettling. The contest is not lost in execution, but in preparation. What appears to be a failure of performance is actually a failure of position, and position is determined long before performance begins. London encounters this tension constantly. New entrants arrive believing competition is open. They study models, learn systems, refine strategies. And then pressure arrives. Liquidity tightens. Volatility spikes. Networks activate. The difference becomes obvious. Some participants adapt instantly. Others scramble. The divergence is not a reflection of intelligence or effort, but a proximity to the forces that were shaping the outcome all along. This is not because one side is smarter. It is because one side is positioned. Those with embedded advantages can wait. Waiting preserves choice. Choice preserves power. Those without margin must act. Action under pressure narrows options. Narrowed options expose weakness. And weakness attracts the very forces that decide outcomes quietly. The system reinforces itself. Calm signals strength. Strength attracts trust. Trust expands margin. Stress signals vulnerability. Vulnerability invites caution. Caution removes support. No confrontation is needed. The system sorts participants without conflict. And because nothing violent occurs, legitimacy is rarely questioned. Outcomes feel deserved. Failure feels personal. This is where frustration grows. People sense imbalance but struggle to define it. There is no rule to challenge, no opponent to confront, only an environment that seems to favor some paths over others. The subtle forces do not argue. They simply persist. London understands this risk. If these forces become too obvious, trust erodes. Belief in fairness weakens. The system must appear competitive enough to sustain participation. Even as outcomes remain uneven, this balance is delicate. Too much invisibility breeds resentment. Too much exposure invites resistance. And managing that tension becomes part of how quiet power survives. The climax arrives when victory reveals itself without confrontation. There is no decisive moment, no dramatic reversal, only a gradual realization that the outcome is already fixed. Those who position themselves early find opportunity where others see constraint. They move calmly while pressure forces others into haste. The system favors stability over struggle. Winners emerge not because they fought harder, but because they never had to fight at all. Their victory is invisible precisely because it was never contested, and that invisibility is the most reliable indicator of how thoroughly the outcome was predetermined. This is the resolution of subtle power. London's role is not to choose winners directly, but to maintain an environment where positioning matters more than aggression, where preparation outweighs reaction, where advantage is accumulated quietly rather than seized publicly. The lesson is uncomfortable but real. In modern finance, fairness does not mean equality of outcome. It means consistency of structure. Those who understand the structure adapt to it. Those who don't experience it as resistance. And because the system rarely announces its preferences, outcomes feel natural rather than imposed. Success appears earned. Failure appears personal. The fight never happens because it was never necessary. So the question becomes unavoidable. If the most decisive forces operate before conflict begins, how many contests are decided before anyone knows they are competing? And how many losses are accepted simply because no fight ever took place? Subscribe to join the journey. The